They were killed without being hit. That was the paradox written in frost on a German combat log in the winter of 1944. Men were dying in foxholes that had protected soldiers for centuries. Trenches, forests, stone walls, none of it mattered anymore. The explosions were not on the ground. They were above it, and the fragments came down like rain. At 6:30 in the morning, on December 16, 1944, near Monschau in the Ardennes, Headman Klaus Richa of the 12th SS Panzer Division wrote what would become one of the most chilling lines in Wehrmacht history. The Americans possessed a weapon that violated every rule of artillery warfare. Shells that exploded in the air. Shells that somehow knew when to detonate. In 3 minutes, 702 German soldiers were dead. Survivors stumbled back in shock, repeating the same phrase over and over. The air kills. What Richa did not know was that he had just witnessed the battlefield arrival of a device so small it fit inside an artillery shell, yet so powerful it would increase artillery lethality by orders of magnitude, save tens of thousands of Allied lives, and quietly redefine how wars would be fought. It was not a bomb. It was not a gun. It was a question asked by radio waves at the speed of light. The proximity fuse. Its story did not begin in American factories or Pacific battles. It began in fear. In October of 1939, as the first winter of war settled over Britain, a young scientist named William Butement faced a grim mathematical truth. During the First World War, anti-aircraft gunners had fired an average of 8,500 shells to destroy a single aircraft. By 1939, airplanes were faster, higher, and deadlier. Britain could not survive another air war with those odds. Butement proposed something radical. An artillery shell that did not rely on timing or impact. A shell that detected its target and detonated automatically at the optimal distance. Radio waves would do the measuring. Mathematics would do the killing. The idea worked on paper. It failed in reality. Any electronic system would be torn apart when fired from a gun. Acceleration forces exceeded 20,000 times gravity. Shells spun at 30,000 revolutions per minute. Temperatures ranged from Arctic cold to desert heat. No vacuum tube, no battery, no circuit built in 1939 could survive that violence. By June of 1940, British scientists proved the concept using unrotated test projectiles fired like rockets. The shell could sense a target, but once fired from a gun, everything shattered. Britain understood the future, but lacked the industrial strength to reach it. So Britain gambled its secrets. On September 6, 1940, the Canadian Pacific liner Duchess of Richmond arrived in Halifax, carrying cargo more valuable than gold. Sir Henry Tizard in a black metal box containing Britain's most sensitive military research. Radar, jet engines, explosives, and a fragile idea that needed an empire of factories to survive. In Washington, on September 19th, British physicist John Cockcroft presented the proximity fuse concept to a 39-year-old American physicist named Merle Tuve. Tuve had grown up building radios in rural South Dakota. He understood both theory and hardware. 1 month earlier, Vannevar Bush had placed him in charge of a secret new research effort, Section T, created for one purpose only. Tuve had listened to radio reports of the London Blitz with his wife. He had heard about children pulled from rubble and neighborhoods erased in minutes. He believed technology had to provide an answer. Now it was his responsibility to make the impossible work. By December of 1940, a mansion on Broad Branch Road in Washington, D.C. became the nerve center of the most ambitious electronics program in history. Tuve assembled a team that included James Van Allen, Lloyd Berkner, Richard Roberts, Henry Porter, and others whose names would later echo through science, but remain classified for decades. Their task was brutal in its simplicity. Build a complete radar system, transmitter, receiver, amplifier, battery, and detonator, inside a steel cylinder 5 inches long, and make it survive being fired from a gun. Van Allen tackled the core problem. Vacuum tubes shattered at 100 G. These would experience 20,000. Working with a hearing aid company in Massachusetts, he pioneered rigid filament mounts and shock-absorbing mechanisms. In January of 1942, he solved it. A spring-loaded system protected the tube during firing, then released it during flight. The patent would remain secret for years. Berkner redesigned the circuit itself, separating transmitter and receiver functions, increasing sensitivity and reliability. National Carbon invented a reserve battery activated only after firing, using centrifugal force to flood electrodes with electrolyte. The shell would sleep safely for years, then wake violently in flight. Inside that shell were 4 vacuum tubes, 130 components, safety interlocks, and a detonator. It transmitted radio waves at frequencies considered cutting-edge even by modern standards. When reflected waves interfered with the outgoing signal, the shell sensed proximity. Not direction, not identity, only distance. If something was close enough to kill, the shell answered. By 1942, the project outgrew its birthplace. Johns Hopkins University created the Applied Physics Laboratory in an abandoned Chevrolet dealership in Maryland. The walls carried blunt instructions. Save time, not money. Failure in battle is our failure. On January 5, 1943, in the waters near Guadalcanal, theory met combat. USS Helena detected incoming Japanese dive bombers. Lieutenant Russell Cochran ordered fire using shells marked with green bands. Proximity fuses. The first salvo missed. The second did not. A shell passed within 60 feet of a Val bomber and detonated. The aircraft did not explode theatrically. It simply stopped being an airplane. Wings sheared away. The engine burned. The pilot died instantly. 2 aircraft were destroyed with a handful of shells. The psychological impact was immediate. For months, gunners had fired thousands of rounds for a single kill. Now the shells were doing the thinking. The Navy moved fast. Tests in Chesapeake Bay destroyed radio-controlled drones in minutes. Admiral William Blandy watched and said only 4 words. This changes everything. By 1943, proximity fuses accounted for just a quarter of naval anti-aircraft fire, but over half of all kills. The rounds per kill ratio dropped from hundreds to 155. Crews thought they had improved. They had not. The system had. In June of 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, James Van Allen stood on the bridge of USS Washington as 423 Japanese aircraft approached. He watched his invention turn ships into fortresses. Aircraft disintegrated without direct hits. The battle destroyed Japanese carrier aviation in a single day. Courage could not overcome mathematics. The Japanese response was not technological. It was suicidal. Kamikaze attacks accepted destruction as the price of impact. Even then, proximity fuses stopped most of them. Without them, casualties at Okinawa would have doubled or tripled. And still, the fuse had more to give. On June 13, 1944, London heard the buzz of the V-1 flying bomb. For years earlier, the city would have been helpless. This time, Winston Churchill authorized proximity fuses despite fears of capture. Within weeks, destruction rates rose from 24% to 79%. In August, 96 of 104 V-1s were destroyed before reaching London. The city survived. Antwerp survived too. Over 4,000 V-1s were launched. More than 90% were destroyed. The port never closed. The Allied advance never starved. Then came the Ardennes. Despite strict orders forbidding ground use, Colonel Oscar Axelson made a decision at dawn on December 16th. Load proximity fuses. Air burst. The shells detonated above snow-covered fields. Fragments rained downward into foxholes and forests. Entire companies vanished in seconds. German soldiers described artillery that followed them into cover. Doctrine built over centuries collapsed in minutes. Patton later wrote of 700 dead in a single battalion. He called it magnificent, then prophetic. When all armies get this shell, war will change again. Behind the battles stood factories. By 1944, 87 companies and 110 factories produced 70,000 fuses per day. Women soldered miniature circuits under strict secrecy. They did not know what they built. Only decades later did many learn their work saved lives. The cost dropped from $700 per unit to $18. Reliability remained above 80%. It was industrial warfare at its most efficient. The secrecy held. Germany captured intact fuses and dismissed them as impossible. Their scientists could not believe electronics could survive such forces. They had the future in their hands and rejected it. After the war, German engineers admitted the truth. They understood the theory. They lacked miniaturization, coordination, and industrial scale. Japan never came close. The proximity fuse killed thousands of enemy aircraft, destroyed thousands of V-1s, and saved hundreds of thousands of Allied lives. It forced new tactics, new doctrine, and a new understanding of warfare. It also carried hidden costs. Beryllium used in production poisoned workers decades later. Women who had never known what they built died slowly from diseases no one understood at the time. They were casualties of war delayed by 40 years. The proximity fuse did. Not win the war alone, but it multiplied force. It turned radar into defense, industry into armor, and mathematics into survival. It proved a simple truth. Faith cannot armor steel. Abundance, not ideology, won the war. And when intelligence entered the weapon itself, the future arrived early. The shells did not hate. They did not fear. They only asked one question. Is something close? Enough to kill? When the answer was yes, the war changed forever.